Are there any other storage methods that you use that are sort of more in line with the olden way?
Don't ever wash your root vegetable, because if you wash it, the oxidization process, the rotting process starts. Always leave the soil round a root vegetable.
Yeah.
It really works.
I learned that lesson the hard way.
I've got a constant argument with the supermarkets with washed vegetables, because they wash them
Yeah.
knowing that
Yeah.
half of them are going to be rotting and people just buy and chuck in the bin.
Welcome back, my friends, to the Epic Gardening Podcast. I'm extremely excited to talk to today's guest. This is Gerald Stratford on the podcast this week, also known, I believe, as the Veg King. But I believe I found you, Gerald, on either TikTok or Twitter. And I have to say, first of all, I'm obsessed with giant vegetables. And also your fashion sense, it really captured me. So I'm excited to have you on the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
How did this all begin for you? I've spoken to a few of the giant vegetable growers over in the UK, Kevin Forty, for example, and it seems like it's really a culture over there. Was giant vegetables, was that how you got into this, or how did your story begin?
I've always been a gardener, but my main hobby through my younger and middle years was fishing. I love fishing. Me and my partner Elizabeth moved up into this little bungalow in the Cotswolds in the UK 6 years ago, just over 6 years ago. And I just got bored with fishing. I still do a little bit of trout fishing, but not like I used to. And I got a lovely big blank canvas, a massive, great big back garden. And we both love gardening. So I said it's only fair that in our twilight years, we just do gardening together. And that's what we've done. I thought straight away, when you're a fisherman, you always want to try and catch one this big or this fat, getting bigger and bigger. And I thought, I'm going to see if I can do the same with my veg. And I read up a little bit about it, and I spoke to Kevin Forty and one or two other people who grow giant veg, and I thought I'll have a go. But it's only a side shoot to just enjoying my gardening. It's not the be all and end all, just growing giant veg. It's just a part of my life. I don't go into world records. I work on PBs, personal best. If I can grow something just 1 ounce bigger than I did before, I'm improving all the time. And I work on that theory. Because if you sort of work on trying to get a world record, now everybody can't be a world record holder. It will frustrate you. And I think it could stop you from doing it eventually. So I just enjoy my gardening and grow a few big veg, which I've been quite successful with.
It seems like Kevin Forty has started many of us on our giant veg journey, because he's the first person I talked to as well. And, I like the idea of going for a personal best, because certainly over here I'm in San Diego, California, let's just say I've had my struggles growing some of these giant vegetables. It's been a challenge, specifically giant cabbage, which I know we're going to talk about. But I guess I'm curious, how did this become something that you decided to share on the internet and sort of have become since a sensation?
Well, started gardening. I was talking to a friend up country, and he said, have you ever thought of social media? And I said, no, I haven't. I'm not a sort of an expert when it comes to computers. And I thought about it, and I thought Twitter sounds a good idea. I could just do it with me and my garden and nothing else. No politics, no sport, just me and my garden. And in February of 20, I got my nephew to put me on Twitter, because I didn't even know how to do it. And he put me on Twitter. And I posted 1 or 2 photographs and got a few followers. I followed a few people. and I was enjoying the journey. And then in May the 16th, 2020, I had a bucket of potatoes ready to harvest. And I gave Elizabeth my iPhone and said, Elizabeth, let's just take a couple photographs of the results. And I emptied the bucket out, got the potatoes, and I put a caption with the photographs, my first early rocket. Now, rocket was the variety of potato. Well pleased. And the phone started buzzing and tweeting, and it wouldn't stop. And at the time, I didn't know how to mute the phone. And so I hid it in the next room and it didn't stop. After about 12 hours of this buzzing and tweeting, I phoned my nephew up, who got me on Twitter, and he come back to me a few minutes later and said, "You've gone viral with your spuds." And then that's when I realised I'd gone from 96 followers to 9,000. And it's been a juggernaut ride
Wow.
since. It's just going up and up and up and up. And I've since joined TikTok and Twitter. And the whole world seems to like what I do. And it makes me feel very proud and happy that I can give people happiness, because the world's it's quite dark at the moment, isn't it, with COVID and war and all the things.
Yeah.
And if I can help break that barrier down and make people smile, I think I'll die a happy man.
I love that. I think I first found you on, I want to say it was Twitter, Gerald. And then, I don't know. There's just something about the way you share your love of growing that I think has captured everyone, certainly has captured myself. And speaking as a gardener, certainly not as long as you, I've probably been growing for 10 years now. I aspire to grow some of the varieties and in some of the quality and size that you've grown. Gerald, it sounds like you've been much more successful than myself at growing massive cabbages.
Yes, I also have failures. I mean, last year, the old UK was very hot in the summer, and I think it affected the growth. And I had a cabbage which was bouncing along really great. And then in July, it got incredibly hot and it just stopped growing and nothing happened. And then when it cooled down, it started to grow again. And if you get different forms of growth, that's when your cabbage is in danger of splitting, blowing up. And that's what happened to my cabbage last year. It was big. It was 70 pounds. It would have been much, much bigger. So you're in the lap, even the experts are in the lap of the gods. You need a bit of help from Mother Nature.
I think in my case, Gerald, I live in a very warm zone here in San Diego, and most of the brassicas that I grow, I have to plant them in either October or November, grow them through what would be most people's winter, and then harvest them, I guess, in late winter. And I think every time I've tried the giant cabbage, I need to leave it in the ground so long that no matter what in my climate, it will get too hot and it'll have that similar problem that you described. So I think that's probably my issue here, but I'd love to hear your techniques.
Do you have a problem with sort of daylight hours? Because I would be inclined, if I had a daylight problem, I would use some sort of lighting, to get the light spectrum correct for it. And that would help. In the UK, we've got plenty of giant seeds, but some giant seed, if it hasn't come from, say, California, it might struggle, So I would recommend sort of when you have a cabbage, if it doesn't sort of make success, keep it in the ground and grow it on the following year to get some seed from it. So you've got your own seed grown in that environment. That might be worth
Yeah. So it's slightly more adapted to my
Yes,
region. Smart. You were telling me something, Gerald, about how uh, the soil for cabbage is pretty important. Yeah.
yes. My father, I lost him when I was only 19, but in that 19 years, he was my God. I learned so much from him. And he grew all his brassicas and he fed a family of eight himself, my mother, my brothers and sisters. We never ever bought any veg. And he would always have the brassicas following root crops. That was a must. Where you had the root crops this year would be brassicas the following year. And he would prepare the ground quite early in the year and then just leave it so it would bed down. And he would just hoe the weeds, but never ever cultivate it so the soil was loose. He would even tread on the soil. Me and my brothers had to do that for him.
Interesting.
And it's basically walking up and down
Yeah.
the soil, up, turn, back, shuffling along to press the soil down. You could use a roller now. So get it. The harder the soil, the better it is.
Interesting. So why do you think he would grow the root crops before the cabbage, but then he would compact the soil after? I would usually think you'd grow the root crops to loosen
Well,
the
a lot
soil.
of the root crops, they add certain nutrients in their growing to the soil, which the brassica like.
Makes sense.
And
Yeah.
he would never ever use, if he used manure on that for the brassicas, it was done very early in the year, say January, February, for planting in April, May, or June. Before he
So it had
yeah,
time to break
and
down.
before the one job he done before he planted it was he spread hydrated lime on the soil because that would kill any bacteria like club root. There's a thing in this country called club root, which can affect the root
I've
system.
heard. Yep.
And he would spread lime, builder's lime, for want of a better word, on the soil about 3 weeks before he planted. And then he would basically, in times of drought, he would water them, but that was it. And we've just took our giant cabbage just to another level, I think. I
Sure.
wish he was here now to see me.
I'm sure in a way he is, it's funny. I lost my father when I was 12. And I didn't grow up gardening. So that's not something I learned from him, but I learned a lot of other things from
Yeah,
him. And so, you have to think that they're somehow watching what you're doing in some way. I don't
that's
know.
true. You were right there.
I'm curious, Gerald, you say you don't go for the world record. So I'm curious what your PB, your personal best massive cabbage
My
is.
personal best is 88 pounds, which I think is
Wow.
43 kilograms.
Wow.
I had
I have some
I
work to
had
do.
one of equal size growing side by side, and I really thought it was going to race ahead, and it split, which is nothing you can do. But it was still enjoyed. I
Can't do it.
enjoyed the
Yeah.
journey with it, and we still ate it.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to ask because I remember I asked Kevin Forty I believe at one point he did have the world record for cabbage, and I asked him what he did with it at the end of its journey, and I think what he said is he made a big stew, and it was perhaps donated to a food kitchen or something like that. I was curious what you do with yours.
I've got quite a large family, and Elizabeth and myself, we freeze food. We eat lots of veg. We're not vegetarian, but we do enjoy veg,
Hmm.
and we freeze stuff. We've even started doing some of the old-fashioned ways, like salting down veg, sauerkraut, etc. The last 2 years, we dehydrate food. make our own sun-dried tomatoes, etc. If there's any left, we've got 2 old people's homes in the village, and I donate fruit and veg to the homes. And basically, anybody who wants it, I never waste anything. You know, those cabbage I just cut up into pieces and just it's all given away, for meals.
Yeah.
I wouldn't grow it if I had to waste it.
You were talking about how you and your wife have tried some of these older methods of preserving or dehydrating foods. And I was curious, if we could talk a little bit more about some of those techniques.
Yes, I mean it's so nice to embrace modern methods for all sorts of things, but never ever forget your roots, because those roots are cast in stone forever, and there's always something you can use. Like I've still got some of the tools my father had, because there's nothing modern better. I have a fork and a spade, which has got a long handle, a 6-foot handle, and you can dig with it and work with it without getting a bad back, because you're not bending over. Now, in the UK, you can never see. Everything is the uniform 3 foot long. Every handle on a fork or a spade is the same size, which is encouraging you to have a bad back.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm a pretty tall guy. I'm 6'4".
Oh,
you seem pretty tall as well, Gerald. How tall
I'm
are you?
6'3", but I've got a brother who's 6'4".
Okay, so I think you and I need to adopt the same tools then. I might need to go for those long spades. It is interesting how they are so short. I've always wondered why a 3 foot is the standard for some reason.
It's so hard. I try every year to try and get a company involved in producing one, because I think it'd really take off. But for some reason, it's so rigid. But it won't stop me trying.
Maybe we'll see a Gerald Stratford spade coming onto the market next year.
It would work, and it would own. If that happened, it would, because it is good and functional.
You use some of these older tools because they simply work, and it sounds like you also use some of these more traditional methods of preservation. You were mentioning with the cabbage, salting them down. That's not something I've ever tried before. So how does that work?
It's not one of my favorite foods, but it's still nice now and again. You're not eating sauerkraut every day, but what we've started to do is make some sauerkraut and add meat to it when we can it down. And so the meat gives the cabbage a lovely savoury flavour. So it's not.
So you'll can meat and the cabbage at the same time.
Or a ham hock. It's very nice. It's done in Germany a lot. In Eastern Europe, they do that. That's where I've got some of the ideas from.
I'm gonna have to try that.
I was fishing in Eastern Europe, and I spotted some of the foods which people were eating, and I thought I'm going to have a go at that, and it really works.
Yeah, I'm gonna try that out. I've got a few cabbages still hanging on.
I mean, I can't talk if it's too hot. But if you have cabbage and say the winter is getting cold and you're frightened of not being able to harvest some, dig a cabbage up with the root and then hang it up, say in a shed or in a garage. And that'll stay like that for weeks. And you can just eat it when you want it. This is why the cabbage is such a good vegetable.
Yeah, it's these sort of practical techniques that I think so many of us have lost. I mean, I'm 35 years old, and so especially growing up in Southern California in a suburban environment, I didn't grow up gardening, didn't really have a lot of space to do it. It's so interesting to me. Some of the things you share sound new because I've never done it before. But of course, they're very old. They're older than both of us
Yeah,
combined, these
yes.
techniques. And it's fun to go back into history and practice these.
I can remember helping my father make a clamp for potatoes. You know, instead of digging them up, putting them in a bag and keeping them in a garage or something, you used to dig a hole in the ground, say 2 feet deep, and the soil, what you dug a hole with, you put round the outside, then you line the hole with straw. And the
Mm,
potatoes you just dug up and dried off, you put in a big pile in this hole. You know, I wish I could draw it for you.
I can see it in my
You
head.
know, the hole filled up with taters. So you've got like a mountain of potatoes coming out of the hole.
Hmm.
And then you put straw all the way round, sort of 6 inches thick, around your potatoes. And then at the top, you used to get a piece of some straw. And if you pull it out, you know, it's easier said than done. You can make like a
Mm,
chimney, which goes on the top.
mm,
And then the soil you've dug from making the hole, you chuck over the straw. So if anybody didn't know it, all they've seen is a pile of soil, you know, with about 20 bags of
yeah.
potatoes inside. And that they will keep from October right through till the following March. Doesn't matter how cold it
Wow.
is, it's being preserved. That's how potatoes were stored years ago, or the
Yeah.
clamp.
And there, you don't find any issues there. So that's about 6 months of the year, almost 4 or 5 months, maybe. And you don't find any, there's no rotting that ends up happening there.
You might, but it was the only way you
Yeah,
had then. You know,
sure.
nowadays all the commercial farmers who are growing potatoes, they store their potatoes in temperature controlled barns, which is costing a lot of
Hmm.
money. And in this day and age, when
Yeah,
power is becoming more and more expensive, the old
yeah.
way might just be the cheaper way to save some money.
Are there any other storage methods that you use that are sort of more in line with the olden way?
Yes, I store carrots in sand or
Ah,
old
okay.
spent compost. When your carrots are ready to harvest, you pull them up, you dry them off somewhere, and you just cut the green off and leave about 1 inch of stalk, and then
Mm,
get a receptacle. I use a trug. We get trugs with handles. They're about 5 gallons, and put 2 inches of sand in the bottom, and then get your carrots nose to tail, side by side. More sand, more carrots, more sand, carrots until you filled it right up. Put it in somewhere
hmm.
frost free and dark, and that will last all winter. And, you know, when the good lady says, I need carrots, I just go across the garage and get them,
Yeah,
you know, and
yeah. I've been looking up that method recently,
it
actually.
really works.
Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting because I live in a house that's not that large, so I don't have. Let's say I go to the garden and I have a big carrot harvest. I don't have that much space in my fridge to store it for a long period of time, especially if there's a big harvest.
One
And so I actually am going to need these
one
methods in
secret:
order to preserve.
don't ever wash your root vegetable, because
Mm-hmm.
if you
Mm-hmm.
wash it, the oxidization process, the rotting process starts. You know, always leave the soil round a root vegetable.
Yeah,
It really works.
I learned that
This,
lesson the
this,
hard way.
I've got a constant argument with the supermarkets with washed vegetables, because they wash them
Yeah,
knowing that
yeah,
half of them are going to be rotting, and people just buy and chuck in the bin.
I know. It's interesting how when you start gardening, you realize how much of what is sold at the supermarket is sold for the look of it. A dirty root crop probably wouldn't sell as well there because people don't understand. And so then they make the produce worse because it sells better because they don't care what happens to it once it gets off their shelf.
It's sad, really, that it's become like this. In the UK at the moment, there's a big drive to get people gardening. But as long as the supermarkets are selling cheap vegetables, it never happen. There will always be a supermarket selling cheap veg. Not necessarily better.
Yeah, definitely not better. I think it's partially like the type of work that you do to share about the growth of vegetables in general gets people excited. Once they get excited and try to grow, they start to realize some of the things that you've shared. Oh, it is more satisfying. It is tastier. Oh, you can store it just like this and it's totally fine. And then that's how change starts to happen, right?
Yes. I'm just so passionate. I talk gardening forever because hopefully one or two will take on the mantle of doing it.
Yeah, I think the same. And Gerald, I'm curious, your methods for growing radish. You must have something creative to share with us.
Growing a radish is the easiest vegetable to grow. And when I have a child, get them growing a radish because it happens very quick and boredom won't set in. And the best way is to get yourself a 1 gallon bucket, fill it full of compost, push it down, not too hard, and then get your packet of radish. It doesn't matter what sort of summer radish. Please don't get confused with summer and winter radish. But a summer radish, they're sometimes long, sometimes round. Most of the summer radishes are round, about the size of a cent. Is it a cent piece or a 10p piece in the UK? And make at the top with your finger to there, 1 inch, just make 10 holes just inside the top of the bucket, a couple holes in the middle, then get your seed, pour it into the palm of your hand, and then 1 seed at a time, just drop it into the hole you've made, push it over, put a label in and a date so you know when you've planted, give it a drink with a watering can, and within 7 days, you will see some shoots coming up. And within 28 to 31 days, you can pull one and eat it. You know, it's so quick. And with a radish, or any vegetable really, it's so easy to plant too thick. You know, put too many seeds down. And with a radish, if you plant too many, you get lots of foliage and no fruit to eat. You know, it's simple as that.
That is something I learned as well. Is it's easy to put a couple seeds in the same hole and then you forget and you let it grow and all of a sudden you have radish shoots and no roots.
I'm getting old and I shake a bit. And you might drop 2 seeds, but if 2 seeds come up, take one out, you know, to leave a good one. You know, and it's therapeutic to see something grow and then eat it. It makes you feel good. You know, it's the first thing I'd done when I was 5 years old. My father gave me a small piece of land about the size of a dining room table, and he gave me a packet of radish seeds, and he told me to go and plant it. And he said, you know how to do it because you've been watching me. And I planted every day before school. I'd go and have a look. And then all of a sudden they come up. And within 28 days, I'd pulled one and it was ready to eat. I took it to my mother. She washed it and I ate it. And I've been eating radishes ever since.
What's your favorite way, Gerald, to eat a radish? Just fresh?
Oh, just fresh with a small amount of salt. I use Himalayan pink salt because I've been told that it's better for us.
Do you ever experiment with growing radish in a giant format or trying to get a personal best?
Most of the giant radish are a variety called Mooley. The Indian nation call it mooli. I think the Japanese might call it daikon. And it's a white radish, very tall and white. And yes, I've grown some quite big, and I have a go
Yeah.
every year. But I also grow a winter radish. They're white, a pink one, and a black one. And they grow about the size of a tennis ball. And they're nice,
Hmm.
beautiful. You can use them in so many ways. The one way I like is just slice it incredibly thin, put it in a small dish, and just sprinkle some balsamic vinegar over it and leave it for about 2 hours.
Yeah.
That is delicious.
I'm going to have to try that one. I don't think I've tried that method with radish. I know for a long time I grew it because it's, like you said, it's an easy plant to grow. And it took me a while to figure out the best way I liked to eat it. And I'll have to try your method of just radish and salt, because I have some of that Himalayan pink salt as well. So I'll try it the Gerald Stratford
What we
way.
used to when we were children is Mum would put a small amount of salt in the palm of your hand, and you add the radish and you just dunk it and ate it. It's delicious. It really is.
That's perfect. Yeah, no,
Pretty
that sounds
simple.
absolutely delicious. Does the same method apply? I had seen on your Instagram you were growing carrots and you were using a tube to sort of cut through the soil, and I was curious what that
That is
method was
for
about.
there's two types of carrot. One is called exhibition long, which grows very long, about 3 feet long. And I get a 200 litre barrel of sand, give it a good water and leave it for a week with a down pipe from your house, a gutter pipe. I've got a piece and I put a handle on the top, and you push it into the sand until it generally takes about 3 attempts. And then when you pull it up, it creates a suction. And then outside, you just shake it and the sand falls out. And you do that 6 times in the bucket, and you have 6 3-inch holes all the way round the barrel. You then fill it up with very, very fine compost with nutrients added. Give it a good drink, leave it for 1 week, and then you plant 3 seeds in each piece. When they come up and show the first the first leaf, you have to be
Hmm.
brave because you've got to snip 2 off. A while ago, I used to pull them out and replant them, but by pulling them out, you upset the root system of the one you're leaving, which carrots don't like. And so I snip 2 off and leave one. And then it's just look after it throughout the summer, giving them a drink when they need it. Not too much. It's better to let them almost dry out and then give them a lot. And then the carrot hunts for water. It keeps going down.
Ah,
It's looking for water.
clever.
And if you keep watering too much, they get lazy and won't hunt. But the leaf will tell you when it needs a drink.
Yeah, so the leaf will wilt,
Well,
and then you'll water
before
it.
it wilts, each part of the leaf will curl round. You with me? It will curl round,
I see.
and that is telling you it's getting ready for a drink. And then when you give it a good drink,
Hmm.
the leaf opens up again. Yeah.
This is a method I remember talking to Kevin Forty about a similar method, maybe the same one, but I still have yet to try it in my garden. And so,
One of the ultimate experts in the world is a gentleman called Medwin Williams, who lives in Anglesey in Wales. And he's a 12 times winner of the famous Chelsea Flower Show
oh,
for,
wow.
for putting on a vegetable display. I'll have to send you a photograph. You remind me at a later date,
Yes.
and I'll send you a photograph of the vegetables that Medwin. Now, Medwin's 80 now, and his son Alwyn is taking on the mantle. But the vegetables they
Mm.
grow are just incredible.
That's yeah, I'm looking at some of his photos now, and it's just, I don't know, there's just something about this craft that is so captivating to me. It's the nurturing of the plant and changing its environment and sort of really deeply understanding how it grows, that I don't know, it just gets me, and sounds like it gets you, Medwin, and hopefully everyone listening to this show as well. Hopefully we've given you some tips in today's show to experiment maybe with radish or carrots this season. And until next time, my friends, good luck in the garden and keep on growing.